At E3 2019, we had a wonderful surprise. Banjo and Kazooie were revealed to be the next Smash fighters, and everyone thought the presentation was done. But then, out of the darkness, we got some weird music, a vaguely familiar art style, when suddenly a direct sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was announced to be in development. This was very exciting, if I do say so myself, and I personally am quite pumped about it. And just yesterday, there was a tweet from a fairly reliable source that Breath of the Wild 2 is slated for a 2020 release. So whether that tweet turns out to be an accurate leak or an inaccurate rumor, this seems like a perfect opportunity to talk about how Breath of the Wild 2 could be Nintendo's 2020 counter to the next-gen consoles coming out that year, and also just some fun ideas of what could be in that game. Let's talk about it. As I alluded to before, this is going to be a multifaceted conversation, so just be ready for some twists and turns as we keep going. But first, as we get started, go ahead and go down and like the video and subscribe to fanatixfour for more content like this every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And also towards the end of the video, leave a comment down below letting me know what you think about all this stuff. And we have a weekly podcast and we pull some of those comments and we talk about it on there. I'll tell you more about that right at the end of the video. But for now, let's get going. So to recap, Breath of the Wild is now the best-selling Zelda game of all time, and the gap is quickly widening. This means that there were more people than ever that stood to be excited by the last E3 reveal of Breath of the Wild 2. And sure, we'd known for a while the Nintendo EPD was working in general on the next Zelda game, but knowing it's a sequel of Breath of the Wild is exciting for a number of more specific reasons, specifically timing and theming. Zelda games are notorious for delays, and while Miyamoto reminds us that a delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad, it would still be amazing and ideal for a game to be good and not to be delayed, if at all possible. Breath of the Wild was originally slated for release in 2015, delayed until 2016, and then finally for 2017. And there's definitely some speculation from me, and probably from some others as well, that the game could have come out in 2016 if they really wanted, but they were waiting for the Switch to come out, so they probably touched up some last little bits and bobs as they were waiting for that to come out. However, needless to say, it was delayed for sure. So the reason a direct sequel is so exciting is that the basis of the game, specifically the engine, core character design, art style, and so on, don't need to be completely created from the ground up. Rather, they can just be adjusted as necessary for the new game, and the team can focus on what's new instead. And seeing as development on Breath of the Wild and its DLC completed around the end of 2017, that means they've had plenty more time to get work on these parts of the game and cut out possibly several years of groundwork. Like how you may know, the Zelda team was given 18 months to complete Majora's Mask after Ocarina of Time. That's why there's all those reused assets and all that good stuff. That was not enough time. But by holiday 2020, it would have been 3 years, so that's a lot more reasonable. But that's the timing aspect in any case. And Majora's Mask brings us to that second bit, theming. Majora's Mask was weird. There's no getting around the fact that a good chunk of Zelda games tell a different variation on the same kind of story, just with new mechanics, remixed worlds, and all of that. They're all great games, but there's a foundation of sameness that tends to plague the theme of save the princess. But they already did that in the first game. If this is a direct sequel, then that means that there's a really good chance that the story will be a much larger sidestep from the traditional narrative. There's a ton of theories on what that might be, but we'll get to that a different time. But what about this rumor then? Here's the Cliff Notes. The tweet was posted by a fairly prominent leaker who goes by Sabi, and to be frank, they've been right on a good amount of stuff in the past. You can look up their track record for yourself if you want, but this seems like an insider to me that cares more about putting stuff up that's right than putting up wrong info for clout, but it's up to you whom you trust. Nevertheless, this tweet claims that the game is planned to release in 2020, but it also specifies that Zelda games can often be delayed. To be fair though, this is just about the safest kind of leak you can post, because unless Nintendo comes out later and says, nah, it was always planned to come out in 2021. Unless that happens for some strange reason, the game could just get delayed indefinitely and you could just say, oh, plans change. So that's why we're not going to talk about that rumor specifically anymore, but rather about the big idea of why 2020 would be the best time for Breath of the Wild 2. Firstly, although we do know a good number of titles for Nintendo 2020, we don't know what exactly is going to be the big holiday game just yet. Granted, I don't expect that we would know this so early, but although Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition and No More Heroes 3 are going to be in 2020, they aren't necessarily the specific system sellers that Nintendo would want to go head-to-head with brand new consoles. And on this really quick, Nintendo has said several times that they're not competing directly with Microsoft and Sony. And although there's aspects to which that's true, specifically that they're not in the graphics race next to them and are kind of carving out their own space in the market, they're still all going to be fighting for consumer spend. And it's amazing that Nintendo and Microsoft are working together so well, but until they actually share a bottom line, the most they could ever be is just cordial and cooperative competitors. When looking at holiday 2020, the question has often been asked, how will Nintendo compete with the next-gen systems? Won't the Switch suddenly be irrelevant? And no, I don't think it will be. Many have suggested that the Switch Pro may be an answer here, and while that's a possibility, I don't have much faith that that's the solution. I think the most likely here is a threefold approach. Big game, cloud gaming, and sales prices. This holiday, the Switch bundle is still full priced, but it just includes a free game. However, to me, this leaves room for the strong impact of a $250 bundle next Black Friday, which, next to the $400 to $600 PS5 and Xbox, that's a steal. The cloud gaming is certainly not a necessity, but there have been rumors of xCloud coming to Switch for a while now, so that could come to fruition around that time and be a great push for both Nintendo and Microsoft. But finally, a big game. Software really does sell consoles. If Breath of the Wild had only come out on the Wii U, a ton more people would have bought a Wii U. I mean, still would have been a commercial failure of a console, but a ton more people would have bought a Wii U. So Breath of the Wild 2 would obviously sell a whole bunch more Switches. And to clarify, this isn't about making sure that the PS5 and Xbox do poorly, but rather just to make sure that the Switch isn't overrun by new consoles, which, to be fair, I don't think is going to happen anyway. But something else that'll ensure that Breath of the Wild sells really well is actually just if it's different. Direct sequels sometimes don't sell as well as their predecessors, simply because people will wonder if they should have played the first game first. But the more changes this game makes, the more apt newcomers are to accept that they didn't need to play the original, and they haven't fallen behind, they're just buying a new game. So with that in mind, here are some ideas to consider for Breath of the Wild 2. A quick and easy one that's been floating around a lot is the re-inclusion of dungeons. Of course, in Breath of the Wild, we had shrines and divine beasts, but from what we've seen so far, we can see that the shrines seem to not appear in this game. So what if we saw the return of dungeons? What dungeons generally do really well in 3D Zeldas, but the divine beasts didn't, was having really strong theming and imagery and mechanics. If you think of a fire temple or a shadow temple or a water temple, don't think of a water temple. There's a distinct image that comes to mind. I actually really liked the shrine aesthetic and even enjoyed its uniformity across shrines, but when it came to the divine beasts, I really wanted them to have their own unique atmospheres instead. Another bit of speculation from the trailer so far is that of a playable Zelda. All the evidence could be circumstantial, but her inclusion from the beginning, her shorter hair for technical reasons, and most of all, Nintendo's own comments from the early stages of Breath of the Wild when they'd wanted to have a female protagonist. And this could take all sorts of forms, whether you have to switch between characters for different chapters, or within the gameplay like Luigi and Gooigi in single player mode like that, or actually in co-op in some way. I just think the story possibilities if Zelda is playable and in the main party are way better than if she's not there and we're trying to rescue her again. And lastly, with all the information we've gotten since the release of the first game, we know of all sorts of cut content that was planned to be in Breath of the Wild but didn't have a chance to make it in. Things like the Minish, some enormous scary things, and huge fortress-like guardians. And this is very speculative, but you know how when the DLC came out, people accused it of being short on story even though it was story DLC? Well, I can't help but wonder if maybe more had been planned at one time and then they took it back so they could save it for the full sequel. Of course, they still had to come up with some kind of story DLC, so they put what they did in there, which was good, but not very deep on story. But I wonder if there was more that was planned even then. From the sounds of it, this is a Mario Galaxy 2 type situation where they had enough content that they could have expanded on the game, but they said, you know what? let's just make another game. So that's where we are. And the last thing I want to mention before we go is that there's a bunch of huge Nintendo games that are going to be coming out that they're working on, but we don't really know anything about. So obviously Shin Megami Tensei 5, Bayonetta 3, and Metroid Prime 4. So if Breath of the Wild 2 were to come out in 2020, I feel like that would be a really good look of good faith to kind of hold the audience over so they can just keep on working on Metroid Prime 4 till 2037. But that's what I think. What do you think? Is Breath of the Wild Nintendo's secret weapon to hold off the next-gen consoles in 2020, or will it even come out in 2020 at all? I don't know. Let me know all that and more down in the comment section below. And like I said, we'll take some of those comments, pull them over to our podcast, which is a separate channel. You actually have to go over there to go watch the videos, although it's linked in our homepage as well, so you can check it out there if you want. And while you're down in the comments, be sure to like the video and subscribe to fanatixfour for more content like this every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern time from myself and from AJ. That he's not over there, AJ, theoretically. Yeah, and then the podcast is every Saturday at 10 p.m. Eastern time. That's about it for me. See you guys later.